Hi, my name's Geoffrey. I'm the author of The Albatross Around the Neck of Albert Ross. And today I'm going to be reading you a story from that book. It's about a rich man and his friend, the Nightingale. I made a paper collage illustration to accompany this story, and here it is. Now for the story, Edwin and the Nightingale. It's inspired by Hans Christian Andersen's story of the Nightingale. Hidden among the lush spice forests, Edwin sat comfortably in a large rattan chair. He was drinking coffee and admiring the rolling cinnamon groves from the veranda of his extremely large and fashionable palazzo. Appearing to grow right out of a flourishing mountain, Edwin's modern luxury palace nestled between white hawthorn trees and wild nutmeg bushes. His home was exquisite, as many of his famous guests commented on more than one occasion. But no matter how you described it, Edwin lived in a wonder of the world. His gardens went on for miles and miles, displaying the precision and artistry of the best gardeners money could afford. The grounds were organized according to Edwin's design, though how far and wide it extended, not even the landscapers knew. Edwin hung silver bells on his favorite plants, and when a spectator would pass by, the bells would sound, drawing attention to the flower, liana, or exotic fruit tree. When the winds picked up, the garden was a chorus of chimes. Composed by nature, the bells sounded out in single tones, brisk harmonies, and even, when the winds were up, a bracing symphony. If you walked far enough, you would come upon a secret forest where tall cypress trees almost touched the skies. Under its canopy, the evergreens concealed bottomless blue water lakes. Beside one of the crystal blue lakes, in an ancient plum tree, nested a nightingale. The common nightingale is a brown bird with touches of red in its tail feathers. They are not particularly pretty birds. They are not the most colorful birds. They are known to sing delicately charming songs with long lamenting refrains. Many of Edwin's guests would visit the nightingale's forest to hear him sing. In spontaneous bursts, the nightingale would croon heart-rending songs, bringing those listening to tears. Sometimes the nightingale would fly around Edwin's gardens, whistling his wondrous sounds. His songs inspired poets to write poetry, dancers to dream up new dances, and artists to create new masterworks. Musicians would go into the forest and search for the nightingale, hoping to be inspired and maybe compose original pieces of music based on his songs. Once, when Edwin was entertaining several friends over the weekend, and after an excellent dinner, they moved to the poolside portico for banana flummery and cake. All the guests looked out on his magnificent gardens, populated with the most beautiful flowers, the most ornate plants, and of course, his collection of rare spice trees. Edwin relaxed in his chair, enjoying the pungent, peppery scents of allspice wafting through the air while drinking a short cup of strong coffee, waiting for his dessert. A famous musician who was visiting Edwin played a new musical composition on the grand piano. The music was based upon the nightingale song she overheard that afternoon. Surprising as it may sound, Edwin had never heard of the nightingale. He knew of many rare bird species that lived on his estates, but he never heard of this particular nightingale before, or its celebrated singing. "Incredible," the musician cried out, "to have so much at your command and yet not know the most wonderful nightingale lives on your estate. It's too much to comprehend." And it was too much to comprehend, Edwin thought. And when he asked around, all of his guests knew about the nightingale. They assumed, of course, Edwin would know the bird. It was his home, his palazzo, and thus it was his bird. Unfortunately, The nightingale never revealed himself or his music to Edwin. "In the morning you must take me to where the nightingale lives," Edwin asked the musician. She readily agreed. They set up an early morning expedition into the spice forest to find the nightingale. Edwin wanted to meet the famous bird and to hear for himself the melodious songs so many people already knew. As they traveled for miles and miles across the lush forest, they listened to many different kinds of wildlife. Edwin held his breath and listened very carefully. He would ask at each sound, crackle, or hoot, "Was that it? Is that the nightingale?" And each time the musician would say, "No, that was a goose." Or she would say, "No, that was a rhinoceros." Or, "No, that was a flamingo." Or, "That was a giraffe." Or, "No, Edwin, that was a frog. But if we are patient, I think we shall hear him soon." Hours later, in the late afternoon, Edwin was getting discouraged, when out of a small clearing, the nightingale, sitting in his plum tree, began to sing his provincial songs. The musician pointed to the small bird seated in its purple-leafed tree and told Edwin, "Look, be silent, and hear." They listened for a long while, mesmerized by the bird's beautiful melodies. To Edwin, the bird song sounded like happiness, like glass bells chiming. The bird's music danced around a merry theme, like warming sunlight enjoyed on a summer afternoon. Edwin was astounded. He never heard such majesty come out of a bird before. There was such longing and spontaneity in his voice, it made Edwin's heart soar. However, he was surprised by how unassuming and common the bird appeared. It was just a pale brown thrush, not the glorious phoenix he had dreamed up in his mind. He thought it would be striking blues like a peacock, or dazzling red like a cardinal. But no, the nightingale was an everyday-looking bird, but Edwin had to admit it had an uncommon voice. The nightingale sang and sang his sweet, blushful songs. Tears welled up in Edwin's eyes and rolled down his cheek. Then the nightingale sang another sweet song, and Edwin's dim heart dissolved into forest mist. And there he sat, a weepy mess, listening with joy to the sounds that this dull-colored bird could sing, all the while wiping his eyes with his silken handkerchief. Edwin was so enthused. In gratitude, he removed a golden necklace and hung it around the nightingale's tiny, feathered neck. "Thank you, but no, I couldn't possibly take such a beautiful object," the nightingale said politely to Edwin. "I have been abundantly compensated by your presence here. I have seen tears in your eyes. Your wondrous reaction to my music will strengthen my spirit in future, lonelier days." "Then don't be lonely. Come to my palazzo in the spice forest," Edwin offered. "You have an open invitation to stay with me at any time for however long you wish." The nightingale began to sing again. "I have wonderful assistants and world-class chefs and plenty of staff. I'm sure you would be most comfortable." The nightingale continued singing. "And should you feel contented, maybe you could come and entertain my guests." The nightingale considered his excellent offer for a long while, and once he was assured that he would not be Edwin's pet, but rather a free bird that could come and go as it pleased, the nightingale agreed. A music palace was built for the nightingale to perform. Edwin hired a famed professor of ornithology from Oxford to create a beautiful nest in a nearby nutmeg bush. Edwin wanted to ensure the nightingale would be comfortable at his home. Sometimes the nightingale would stay with Edwin for weeks at a time. He performed nightly for the many celebrated guests Edwin entertained. And when he was not performing for an audience or resting, he would sing accompaniment with the musician as she wrote new compositions. During these times with the musician, the nightingale learned a great many things about music. The nightingale was never trained as a musician, but rather as a poet. He tried to intone what he felt at that moment. The nightingale never understood the musician's desire to write down the tune they sang yesterday because, as the nightingale understood it, it was a new day. It deserved a new song. Edwin was so pleased with the nightingale, he asked the bird to perform several times a day. He listened to his anthems with an open heart, and tears would run down his cheeks while he proclaimed his utmost joy. When the nightingale missed his home, he would pick up and fly past the near meadows, over the still streams, over the rare spice trees, through the majestic gardens, and find his way back to his plum tree. He would relax in the comfort of his own nest and simply be with his family. On one of the nightingale's excursions home, Edwin received a large package labeled "The Nightingale." It was sent to him from his friend Dagmar. Thinking it was yet another portrait of his now famous nightingale, Edwin opened the box half-heartedly. By this time, Edwin had many paintings and sculptures completed by renowned artists. However, much to his delight, he found a stunning gift inside. It was a replica of the nightingale, cast in gold and encrusted with diamonds, rubies, and sapphires. But instead of a lifeless sculpture, this was a golden, wind-up animatronic. It was made of gears, motors, and gyros, and when the clockwork bird was wound up with a small cut-glass key, it could sing one of the nightingale's songs. As it would sing, the clockwork bird's head would look around the room, and at times it would waggle its glittering golden tail. Edwin owned many beautiful things and displayed them around his luxurious palazzo, but he was quite surprised to hold such a treasure in his hands. Around the artificial nightingale was wrapped a golden ribbon that read, "Merry Christmas from your dear friend, Dagmar." Dagmar was always one to try and outdo other people's gifts, and Edwin always looked on her with suspicion. However, to Edwin's eyes, this present was a treasure. He wound up the bejeweled clockwork nightingale and played its one song over and over again. "It sounds like my nightingale," Edwin cried. And Edwin fell in love with his new nightingale very quickly. When it wound down, he would wind it back up again. He took the clockwork bird with him everywhere. He would take it around his palazzo, bringing it to meetings with clients and friends. He would carry his nightingale to meals and even bring the golden bird with him when he exercised. The clockwork bird would sing the same song to Edwin, and Edwin was delighted. It was not uncommon to see him cart the wind-up nightingale with him throughout the whole day. From the moment he woke to the instant his head touched the pillow for sleep, Edwin was near his toy. When the real nightingale returned to Edwin's palazzo, he was just in time to witness a performance at the music palace, held for a large group of Edwin's friends. The clockwork nightingale was about to take the stage with a musician. Edwin was thrilled to show the nightingale his new nightingale. "Aren't you impressed?" Edwin asked enthusiastically. The nightingale was impressed and said, "What a lovely thing you have." The musician began to play a black grand piano, and slowly the clockwork nightingale began to sing. The nightingale bowed to the clockwork nightingale and took a seat next to Edwin. As the artificial bird crooned, the musician played soft, sweeping background sonatas. Their timing was perfect, and the breathtaking audience was visibly moved. When they finished their concert, everyone rose to their feet to applaud the brilliant music. Edwin was filled with joy and looked meaningfully at his friend, the real nightingale, who was equally electrified by the music. "So tell me, what did you think?" Edwin asked. "I thought it was sublime," said the nightingale. I cannot enjoy my songs in the same way when one does when they are listening to me. I can only hear emotions that come to my mind as I sing. So this was a rare treat indeed. I thank you dearly, Edwin. The musician called out from the stage to the real Nightingale, "Would you join us on stage for a duet?" The audience thought this was a fantastic idea and began to applaud. Embarrassed, the Nightingale joined the Clockwork Nightingale on top of the shining piano. They both bowed to the musician, then bowed towards the audience. The musician again began to play her sweeping sonata. The Clockwork Nightingale sang its song again. And as soon as the real Nightingale found his footing within the song, he joined in too. The Nightingale sang a beautiful solo that fit the song perfectly, taking the music into a new direction with new feeling. This took everyone by surprise. The audience started to shift in their seats. Some started to shuffle their feet and feel uncomfortable, and others began to whisper to their neighbors. Some people talked outright, saying to anyone who might listen that they were not enjoying the real Nightingale as much as they adored the golden bird. The audience expected to hear the same song that they had just heard and not sure they liked what they were listening to now. They anticipated re-experiencing the same feeling they had just felt. But instead, this was different and astonishing. It was too new, too pretentious, the audience thought. When the musician finished playing their song over, she applauded the Clockwork Nightingale, much to the approval of the audience. She took the wing of the real Nightingale and said politely, "Next time, we shall practice a bit more before I put you on the spot like this again." The Nightingale said thank you and looked out to the audience. They were all glaring at him as if he had done something very wrong. Even Edwin did not look pleased. The Nightingale bowed to the musician. He bowed to the golden, jewel-encrusted Nightingale, and then he flew to the right hand of Edwin and bowed to him. Then his wing bit into the air, and he flew off over the nutmeg bushes and faded off into the night sky. Edwin was saddened to see his friend leave so quickly, and he waved slowly as it trailed off into the forest. The audience began to murmur, "How dare the Nightingale not bow to them?" They began to gossip and talk badly about the Nightingale, glad to see it leave in a huff. Some people even started to say how plain and unbecoming the bird was, not nearly as elegant as the golden bird that was still here, seated politely on the piano. The musician spoke to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, no one ever really knows what to expect from a real Nightingale, but with our clockwork bird, everything goes to plan." The audience whispered while Edwin nodded approvingly from his rattan chair. The musician continued, "If we must have one Nightingale, I think we can all agree we are better off with our golden friend." Edwin clapped, agreeing with the musician, and asked, "On behalf of the audience, would you play your song once again, if you please?" In the days and weeks after the Nightingale left Edwin's palazzo, the Clockwork Nightingale stayed by Edwin's side. It sat on a sultan's cushion near his desk. When Edwin would need to hear its song again, he would wind it up and let it play. Some days Edwin would let the bejeweled Nightingale play all day long, and it was not unusual to hear the golden bird sing its song 144 times in a row. Edwin was pleased by how many people enjoyed listening to his clockwork bird. It made him feel special, loved, even more distinctive than his wealth made him feel. Yet in his heart, Edwin knew his love was a lesser feeling from what he enjoyed when he was in the company of his friend, the real Nightingale. One night, Edwin heard a strange clicking sound coming from his clockwork Nightingale. It sprung, sputtered, and clicked. It gave a loud clack and then stopped singing altogether. The Clockwork Nightingale was broken. Edwin was in a forlorn panic. He never imagined it could break down. He called in an expert to assess the inoperative bird. But the expert was not encouraged by his findings. The expert concluded the Nightingale's clockwork mechanism had worn down from overuse, wear and tear, and lack of regular maintenance. There was nothing to be done to fix the bird, as there is no way to replace the internal parts needed without causing further damage. It was a one-of-a-kind object, and being one of a kind meant it could not easily be repaired. The expert warned Edwin if he tried to repair it, there would be no guarantee it would be able to play its song in the same way it once did. They agreed that the expert would fix the golden nightingale just enough so Edwin could play its song once a year. Each Christmas, Edwin invited his friends to come and listen to the clockwork bird sing its song once and only once. Then it was whisked away and placed in a glass case on its silken cushion, displayed in Edwin's bedroom. There he could enjoy looking at the bird even though it could no longer sing. For 5 years this ritual took place, and each year when the clockwork bird would sing, rather than making Edwin happy, it made him feel very, very sad. His sadness would fill the room, making it heavy and wearisome on his guests. Over the years, fewer people accepted his Christmas invitation, and this year, only the musician decided to come. The musician was always indebted to Edwin. She wrote a very popular song from the Clockwork Nightingale's melody. It was a best-selling album around the world. The whole planet was enchanted by the Nightingale's song. When the musician arrived at night to Edwin's palazzo, Edwin's assistant told the musician that the Christmas celebration would not be held. Edwin was very ill and near death. The musician was distraught to hear this and demanded to see Edwin. And there he lay, cold and pale, on his magnificent bed. Moonlight shone on Edwin and his artificial bird. When the musician saw him laid out, she thought Edwin was dead. But Edwin was not dead. He was sad to see the musician looking down at him with such hesitancy in her eyes. He tried to speak to her, but he could hardly breathe. It was as if a great weight was sitting on his chest. When Edwin looked properly, he saw that it was Death, sitting cross-legged right on top of him, right on his chest, poking at his heart with a bony finger. Edwin saw in Death's limpid eyes the blackness that overshadowed him. From his death cloak, Death drew out a magic flute. It played a cantankerous melody born in cacophony. Supernaturally, a set of ghostly, velvet curtains emerged from beyond. From behind the curtain materialized hundreds of mournful faces, people from Edwin's past. Some were horrifying and frightening, while others were gentle, caring, and compassionate. Death lounged on Edwin's chest and laughed. These faces made Edwin recall his past deeds. He contemplated how well or inadequately he treated the people in his life. Many of the faces in the crowd simply stared through him in a state of pure serenity. Others leaned into Edwin and told him phantasm stories that made cold sweat run down his forehead. "Do you remember me?" one ghostly face asked Edwin. He did not. "Sing, sing to me," Edwin cried out to the broken nightingale, but the clockwork bird could not sing. It only looked at him with its starry, motionless, ruby eyes. "Please sing, please, just a bit of music," Edwin called out, but the musician stood silent, not knowing what she should do. Through his great, hollow eyes, Death looked into infinity, and it was quiet, deathly quiet. Suddenly, a sweet burst of sound filled Edwin's bedroom. Sitting on the branches of an allspice tree, the little nightingale from Edwin's past began to sing. In the nighttime, The brown bird appeared to be jet black. Edwin feared it was another ghost, asking him to revisit his troubling memories. Edwin always felt terrible remorse at how the nightingale left his home. He wanted the nightingale to feel admiration in the same way that he admired the nightingale. But it didn't work out the way that he hoped. The musician spoke. "Please, little bird, come and sing for our poor Edwin. He has never needed your comfort more than at this moment." As the nightingale sang, the phantasms around the ghost curtain grew pallid, and slowly they began to fade. The colors of life began to come back into Edwin's face, and slowly he sat upright. Death listened perilously to the beautiful song being sung by the nightingale. And when the nightingale caught Death's hollow eyes, Death was entertained. "Please, little nightingale, continue with your delightful song," Death said. The nightingale agreed, "Only if you promise to release Edwin. He is my friend, and this is not his time to go. You know this as well as I do, and we should like to spend a bit more time with him over Christmas." As an ornamental vision, Death stood up and unseated his pale, ghastly form from Edwin's chest and hovered to a silken cushion where he sat down tranquilly. The nightingale took in a deep breath and sang a song of lovely white gardens, where white roses grow among nutmeg bushes. He sang of green grasses and lush trees filled with plums. He sang of hopeful, silver days still in front of us, in which we can do anything, change everything, and make good the mistakes we are obligated to mend. The nightingale continued to sing and sing, charming Death with faded anthems to make it long for its home. In a cold, gray mist, Death apparated into the hereafter of Neverwhere. When it was apparent Death had gone away, Edwin was ecstatic in his appreciation. "Thank you, thank you, thank you," Edwin cried out while the musician stood in the far corner applauding the most fantastic piece of music she ever heard. "Little nightingale, you came back to me in my hour of need," Edwin said. "I mistreated you, and yet you sent Death away, gleefully. How can I ever repay you for such a wonderful gift?" "Think nothing of it, my dear friend," the nightingale said. "Now lie back and rest yourself while I sing you back to health." The nightingale sang until Edwin fell into a sound, inspirational sleep. In the morning, the nightingale was still singing, and Edwin woke up a new man. "Please, my friend, will you stay with me always?" Edwin asked. "Sing to me only when you wish, and come and go as you like. I will even break the clockwork bird into 1,000 pieces if it pleases you. Please, just stay." "Oh, no, please don't destroy. Your clockwork bird is a wonder. Keep it near you as a memory of today. I will stay in my forest and come and visit you often. I will come to your window and sing to you. I will sing songs of life's riches, songs of the poor who are struggling, and I will sing songs of those who need help more than you just received. I will sing to you of farmers and fishermen and factory workers. I will sing to you of bankers and lawyers, and I will sing to you of the sick and the brave doctors who attend to them. I will make sure that you will never be without song again. I promise you this. I love your heart more than I do your wealth, which may be a silly thing to say, but I am a bird, and birds don't care for anything they cannot eat or sing about." "But," Edwin stuttered, "never fear. I will come to you if you will promise me one thing." "All that I have is yours," Edwin cried, and he stood up from his bed and bowed a deep bow to the nightingale. The nightingale bowed back to him and said, "Tell no one about my visits," and flew away. Thank you very much. See you next time.